Hello and welcome back to Polar Night. We will be continuing where we left off, which, if you recall, was a while ago. I think that the ship that they were on was suffering some electrical malfunctions, which Garret, which is the main character, who's a sort of skinny Scottish, I think, wolf, he was able to help fix it, but unfortunately, well, not even unfortunately, the bosun, which is the bull, who I believe is Russian, was kind of upset about that because he's the only one that knows how to maintain it properly, since the ship apparently is having some really weird issues where if you start like turning everything on, the whole thing like just will break down. So you have to do everything very carefully. But thankfully it seems that everything is working now. Aside from that, there was a fight, I believe, between Stefan, which is the little possum that we see right here, and Sharif, where Stefan was going through Sharif's cabin, trying to find something. I'm not really sure what exactly, but I believe it's because Stefan himself doesn't really believe what happened, and he thinks that Stefan has or knows something about what happened to the Arran. I don't really remember what else. I think that there was also a fight between Sharif and Rufus being the deer, where Rufus kind of wanted to confront Sharif about the way he's behaving and things like that. But I believe if you allowed that to happen, it would end up in an even bigger fight. So I decided not to let Rufus handle it, and I went in his place. And that sort of fixed everything, I guess. The update ends where Garret goes back to his room. He realizes that, I don't remember if it's his smokes or some of his medication ended up flying out the window, unfortunately. So I think it was his medication, because I think it was something that was even more valuable than his smokes, because I think that they sell those in the ship anyway. So yeah, he ended up having to try to sleep through the pain. I think he was having a dream or something about somebody going into his room or something, I forget, where he was like trying to calm himself down by counting down. But yeah, that's where it ended. That's as far as I remember, I think. Anyway, so I guess without further ado, let us continue Polar Night and see what happens. Actually, before that, I do know that there are some CGs I'm not sure if they're CGs or background art, which are not finished yet. So what you're going to be seeing for this video is their work in progress version, but that's sufficient. Anyway, so yeah, let's continue. Hey, you done having a wee cry? Fuck off. Come on, you can't stay here forever. Clyde is gone and Mom is worried. Don't care. There was a rustling and grunting, some swearing as I heard him climbing the wall. I hurriedly wiped my eyes and nose. Soon he hauled himself up beside me on my perch, a tall wall overlooking the park near my home. Fuck me sideways. I miss being a wee skinny rake. Enjoy it while you can. You won't be able to climb walls like these once you've put on some meat on them bones. Not my fault you're a fatty. He was built like a boxer, but still, it was all that I could think of in the moment. Cheeky weak. He nudged me but grinned, then pulled me into a headlock and pulled on my ears. Connor, get off of me, you fucking what? What you gonna do about it, wee man? He continued to tug on my ears, a tease that he'd done since as long as I could remember. As miserable as I was, and as much as he infuriated me, I grinned. Started to laugh even as I struggled to free myself. I thrust an elbow into his stomach, causing an oof and forcing him to finally release me. "You fight dirty." He pushed me away playfully and I shoved him back. "Wee pup has some bite after all." Prick. And just like that, as furious and seething as I had been, it melted away, leaving us sat quietly, watching the streetlights slowly flicker to life in the advancing dusk. I hate him. The words burst out from me like an angry sneeze. We were quiet for a moment. Then, I fucking hate him. I expected my brother to tease me, as was his insufferable habit. He never knew that he was taking things too far, and often I got the impression that he just didn't care. He spoke so matter-of-factly, giving nothing away. "He actually likes you, though." "Nah, he likes that he can call himself my dad. He doesn't like me. He likes that I'm the captain of the football team and that I've got good marks in school. If I quit football or stopped giving a fuck about my grades, it'd be a different story. Oh, by the way, that, thing that I found in your room?" Fuck, I felt the heat rising in my cheeks and my tail curled tight against me in humiliation. "So, you into guys?" I just wanted to fall into the ground and disappear. Both. "Oh, hi. The lads and the lassies. Greedy wee fuck." I glanced up at him and was met with a wide, toothy grin. "That why you're not into sports? Too many sweaty, huffing lads all hot and..." "Connor, for the love of fuck, just shut up." I was tempted to hurl myself from the wall and pray that I broke my neck, but Connor just laughed and slapped my back. "I'll be sure not to invite my footy pals over. You think that you've died and gone to heaven." I gave a low, humiliated whine and covered my eyes. "Just kidding, wee man. You know that I love ya, anyway. Now..." He slapped his hands together. "Why don't you take me home before Mom starts to worry?" With a heavy sigh, I nodded, and we turned to start climbing back down the wall, but my heart felt a little lighter than it had done in a long time. Saturday. Slowly my eyes opened, burning from tiredness. It felt like I'd only just dropped off. It was pitch black again, but this time the room was uncomfortably warm. I peeled off my bedsheets, groaning as I swung my paws over. The radiator was on full blast. I knelt and turned it down. At least I now knew Joseph had fixed the heating. My stomach clenched as I remembered the events of yesterday, guilt followed by anxiety over how I could stand to face a pissed-off crew for the next couple of weeks. Or at least half of them were. I was matted and damp. The heating must have been on for a while now. As much as I wanted to drop off again, I knew the sweltering heat would keep me awake. I checked my phone. 3:11 a.m. I figured a shower would have been amiss. I'd need to change my bedsheets before I tried to sleep again, though. Before I did, though, I decided to open my bedroom porthole. I could let the excess heat out while I showered, hopefully making the room cool again before bed. I padded over to the windows and grabbed the handle and pushed, inviting a gust of frigid air inside. Gazing out, I could see... Is that land? It was hard to tell with the haze in the distance, no doubt another blizzard on the way, but there was what appeared to be a vast field of solid ice nearby. And where were those mountains? Where the hell were we? I thought we'd be searching the seafloor and Sharif didn't mention land. You know what? This can wait until after I clean up. After stripping off my underwear, I turned the knob for the shower. Despite the heating being on, I wasn't taking chances this time. I placed a hand tentatively in the steam to ensure that it wasn't either going to scald me or freeze me. Fortunately, it settled at a comfortable temperature and I climbed in, adjusting it down a little for a cooler wash. A long, satisfied sigh escaped my muzzle as I just stood, head leaned back, allowing the water to run over my chest. I allowed myself a smirk at the irony of needing to cool down while in the middle of the Arctic. My anxious brain was quiet for a change. The insufferable voice that has always looking for things to worry over was probably overwhelmed at the options it had right now. My smirk turned into a chuckle. I don't know why I felt in such good spirits, but I wasn't going to question it. Just as I turned the handle to shut off the water. Like a red-hot poker had been jammed into my eye, I clamped it shut, covering it with a hand. I struggled over to the sink where my toiletries bag was. I fumbled the bottle of Proxy and popped the top off, letting it fall to the floor as I squeezed one, then 2 drops in. Another sigh, harsher and less relaxed, but no less relieved. I allowed it to do its work as I closed my eye and leaned over the sink. Once my eye was pain-free, for now, I glanced up at myself. Once again, my gaze was drawn by my gaunt frame, the way my ribcage stuck out beneath my fur. The memory of my first night here, almost naked in front of the others, made me grit my teeth. I pulled down my left eyelid to examine it. The milky cataract stared blankly back. What could anyone see in this fucking skeletal wreckage of a wolf? Bile rose up in my throat. A burning coal of hatred ignited once more in my chest as I remembered the man who did this. But I was interrupted in my self-pity by a noise, muffled, but unmistakably the sound of voices. I pricked an ear, glancing towards my bedroom. Was that a shout? I padded back into my bedroom, ears still pricked and swirling, trying to catch the voice again. Then, "Quiet, come with." I couldn't make out much, but I recognized the voice. Joseph's deep baritone was unmistakable. I shuffled to the door, placing an ear against it, listening intently. I could hear paw steps retreating back towards the engine room stairs. I decided to risk it. I carefully twisted the knob, grimacing as I did my best to open my cabin door quietly. The corridor was dark again. The power in my room was on, so someone must have switched the lights on manually. My eyes had adjusted a bit to the darkness of my bedroom, just enough to spot the figures at the far end of the corridor. Unless one of the bulkheads had gotten up and started walking, one was undoubtedly Joseph. The other was much smaller, but given the glimpse that I got from the long, thinned tail, it had to be June. I only saw them for a moment before they disappeared down the steps to the lower deck. "Told you, dangerous." "Not here. When we..." Their voices were hushed, but I could hear the tension. June sounded angry. I've gotten the impression June and Joseph were close, than either would ever admit. It could be a late-night rendezvous, but the tone in their voices suggested otherwise. Yeah, I needed to follow them. I figured that I should maybe pull on my trousers at least, but if I could catch the entire conversation, I'd risk it. I patted down the corridor carefully, my eyes adjusted slowly, but even in full night vision, I could only make out the vague shapes of the other cabin doors. God, I hoped nobody decided to go for a late-night walk right now. Once at the bottom of the stairs, I turned to my right. I could see the light glow from underneath Joseph's cabin door. And already I could hear raised voices. "Promised me. No. Without my say-so." "I could not. If he questioned you, truthfully say you didn't know." I crept closer. This was the second time that I've heard June so angry, after the incident at the bar with Arran and Dana. They were obviously moving around, or at least one of them was, as their voices kept shifting in volume and how muffled they were. "That's for me to scare the life out of me, and now the others are..." There was an awkward pause and I chanced a few more steps closer. "Continue? Are you serious? How should I..." "But now he knows, and he has 2 weeks to. You saw how they all blamed." What were they talking about? He knows? 2 weeks to what? I wanted to get closer to hear more, but I couldn't risk having them suddenly open the door to see me naked and snooping. I instead stayed put, giving me what I hoped was enough distance to reach the stairs if I needed to leave in a hurry. Her voice was mournful now, more subdued. She didn't seem to be moving around as much. "We should have had the chance." You know why. Would understand. Both of our lives. My life is already... How long is he going to? I've been over this. That is why he'll never be able to. Without me. I felt my blood run cold as I hear a similar tone in his voice to when Rufus had taunted him. Whoever this he was, Joseph was not fond of him. And who is he? There was a brief cry and the sounds of muffled sobbing. There was only an inaudible murmuring as I assumed Joseph comforted June. My mouth was dry and my heart raced. There really was something going on now, and I trapped us all on this thing. Should I tell someone? Would anyone believe me? It would be my word against Joseph and June, and really, what would I be accusing them of? All I could say for sure is that they were both up to something, and it sounded like they were doing it to screw over some unknown guy. Motion from the room made my heart skip a beat, and I quickly slipped back towards the stairs, just as the door opened, bathing the spot where I'd been stood moments before in light. I don't think that I've ever climbed stairs so quickly in my life. I'd made it to my door a second before I heard June reach the top of the stairs. Thankfully, I'd not turned on my bedroom light. I closed the door as quickly as I could and waited, my ear against the wood. Rapid footsteps approached and I felt my heart leap into my throat. And they stopped. Fuck. I'd been caught. She spotted me. She was going to knock, demand that I explain. A soft whimper and sniff followed by a sharp inhale. The sounds of rustling clothes as though she were fixing her clothing. Then the footsteps continued, fading until there was only silence again. I turned, leaning my back against the door. My thoughts raced. Maybe I could change my mind, tell the others that I had enough. It would be hard on Gail and Stefan. I had no idea what June and Joseph were up to, but Joseph clearly had a grudge against someone, and June was involved. And the rest of us were caught up in this pissing match in the worst possible place. The morning was going to be fantastic. Another bout of Sharif shouting, Tabby complaining, maybe even Rufus and Joseph butting heads. Who could I tell about this? I didn't know who this he that Joseph was referring to could be, and I didn't want to get involved. What if I tipped off whoever Joseph was feuding with? Morning. This could wait until morning. I continued to slowly grumble to myself as I flicked the lights on and pulled fresh sheets from the cupboard. I threw the old stuff in a corner. I could deal with laundry in the morning. It had cooled right down with the porthole open as I closed it again so I didn't freeze. No sooner had I finished making the bed that I flopped down and gave a groan of frustration. If I had known this trip would be such a clusterfuck. But then I reached for my phone and once again gazed sadly at Mom's texts. Guilt threatened to overwhelm me, but this time I remembered my decision. Against all odds, I had decided to continue. For her. As much as it hurt me to know that she would be beside herself with worry, I took some small comfort in that. I sat back down, resolving to prioritize above all else, getting into contact to reassure her that I was fine. I closed my eyes, feeling a small measure of optimism. The sounds of ice bumping and scraping the hull was unsettling. It was sporadic, mostly seeming to come from my side of the ship. I remembered seeing what appeared to be land of some kind, last that I'd looked out the porthole. Maybe we were navigating around an island or something. Being close to land did settle my nerves a bit whenever a particularly loud ice impact sent a chill through me. What was it that Stefan had said? Something about an old sailing ship getting crushed in ice? But then I found myself reasoning that the metal hull of the Sylvia was, hopefully, more resilient to such a fate. The thought of using Stefan's ramblings to reassure myself brought a small smile. I don't know how long that I lay there, just listening to the sounds and trying to organize my thoughts. The air was cool, but the gentle motion of the ship combined with the quiet noises of the ice made it hard to fully switch off. It seemed to be developing from low, echoey snappings to more of a crackling noise. Maybe we were entering a thicker ice? After a while of failing to drop off, with a resigned huff, I threw off the covers and stood. Fuck this. I'm going for a smoke. But then it hit me. No lighter. Okay, fuck this. I'm going for a walk. Maybe getting some air would help, and I could see the ice situation for myself. I pulled on my clothing, ensuring that I had a few bottles of Proxy and Diclo in case I had another thunderclap. My smokes were in my pockets as per usual, even without a lighter. It was automatic, like making sure that I had my phone, wallet, or keys. Zipping up my jacket, I listened for sounds in the corridor for a moment to ensure that I wouldn't run into anyone before making my way to the deck. The snow crushed underfoot as I made my way to the side. My hand moved on its own to my pocket, and I was halfway to pulling a smoke from the pack with my teeth when I remembered my missing lighter. I'd never really realized just how ingrained the habit was. My heart picked up and my nerves frayed, especially at the prospect of my Alisoran going missing. Maybe I could convince some of the others to help me search tomorrow. Maybe. With a heavy sigh, I leaned on the bulwark and gazed out towards the rising dark snow-clapped peaks looming out of what looked like an incoming blizzard. Another batch of bad weather. I wish Sharif had picked a better time of the year for this expedition. I didn't know what to make of this stuff with Joseph. My suspicion about the breakers being deliberately screwed up seemed to be on the money. It was while I was pondering how to react when I saw it. Subtle at first, but then the smell hit. Acrid, cloying and foul, the scent hit the back of my throat and burned my nose, triggering a retching cough. Tufts of smoke were escaping from somewhere beneath me. From the portholes, I glanced down over to the side and felt my heart stop. Oily black fumes were pouring out of the porthole. As I watched in dawning horror, the smoke intensified and was joined by plumes billowing from a second, then third porthole. Fuck! Just as I spun on my heel to run inside, a figure skidded out of the door from the lounge. Garret! Dana, there's fire, smoke. I know. Stay here, do not go back inside. She tossed a life jacket at me and turned back. If anyone else shows up, tell them to stay right here. I need to find the captain and warn the others. Before I could protest, she dashed back inside. My mouth was dry and my hands shook. I fumbled with the jacket, trying to put it on over my bulky coat. I coughed again as the wind blew the smoke back into my face. I couldn't stay here. It felt like the fire was right under my feet. My eyes stung and I glanced back towards the rear. It seemed like it was clear that way. There was an ear-piercing scream coming from somewhere beneath me. People below decks, struggling to escape. I couldn't just stay here. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, tried to help the others escape. Then I heard the sound of something pumping beneath me, like a cork, followed by a loud hissing noise. The hissing increased in pitch, like a whistling kettle. I realized that I needed to be anywhere but where I was currently standing. But by the time that I started to run, a bright flash blinded me. Everything glowed orange, scorching me and lifting me off my feet. Ah! The moment that I hit the water, it felt like I'd been slammed into concrete. I gasped, instantly inhaling water. The cold was indescribable. My muscles instantly seized, and for a moment, my body couldn't move. My mind couldn't comprehend the sensation. Then my lungs burned and I choked, thrashing around as I tried to figure out which way was up. I tried to breathe, my brain refusing to accept that I was underwater, and I only got another lungful of frigid ocean water. I'd expelled all the air in my lungs from my scream as the explosion threw me overboard. All I had was salt water, choking me. My whole body was sluggish despite my panic. Nothing could ever have prepared me for this utter cold. I finally managed to orient myself. A deep orange light pointed me to the surface, the fire. I gurgled, feeling like a lead weight was pulling me down. My clothing meant for protection from the element was the absolute worst thing that I could be wearing at this moment. I drove myself upwards, thrashing, flailing, desperate. I broke the surface, trying to suck down precious air. I almost threw up as I choked, spilling water from my lungs as I thrashed and flailed. Help! It took 2 full breaths to expel the water, and I have never taken a breath in my life more glorious than the inrush of air that followed. I struggled, trying to orient myself. Where was a Sylvia? The cold was like a million knives digging into me. My clothing might as well have been an anchor dragging me under the surface. I tried to remember. What had June said? Don't panic. Get into a stable floating position. I'd not managed to get my life jacket on, and without it, floating was utterly laughable. And as for not panicking, I tried to tread water, pawing at the icy ocean. My limbs felt tight, my chest constricted, and my legs felt like they were moving to treacle. I screamed and yelped, choking as gobfuls of water splashed into my mouth, and I frantically tried to keep my head above the water. My one mercy was that the ocean was relatively calm, and it gave me enough visibility to spy an expanse of white nearby. Ice. I had no idea if it was thick enough to support my weight, but I no longer cared. I started to weakly paddle towards it. Every movement was agony. Each time that I pawed at the water, it felt like my arms were trying to cut through tar. I just wanted to stop, to float, to sleep. Every breath that I took was choked by water splashed into my face. The ocean waves washed over and around me. I couldn't tell if they were carrying me further away from the ice. My strokes slowed, my breathing labored, and my legs burned in agony. The cold alone was torture, the worst pain that I'd ever experienced, more than even my thunderclaps. But when every ounce of warmth was sucked out of you, numbing your limbs, leaving you wondering if your arms and legs were even still there, all I wanted was to stop, close my eyes. Inch by inch, in constant suffering, the ice drew closer until, with all the strength that I could muster, I reached for it and dug my stubby claws into it. The ice was just above chest level. Both my hands were planted on the surface, pulling my chest against the edge. All I needed now was to pull myself up and onto the cold, but at least dry surface. My breathing slowed, my eyelids felt heavy. If I'd allowed them to close, I wasn't sure that I'd ever open them again. My claws clung to the ice. If it weren't for the layer of snow providing friction, I'd have just simply slid off to sink into the depths. I pulled. My body ached. My muscles screamed, and I did too. Tears poured from my eyes, or at least I think they did. It's hard to tell when you're soaked to the bone. My ears rang. Every sinew strained to yank my body out of the water. First my chest. The weight of my soaking clothes amplified as I left the water. Then my hips as I scrambled onto the snow, crawling until I was finally fully out. My panting, heaving breaths were the only noise apart from the waves. The snow beneath me, cold as it was, might as well have been a heated blanket compared to the Arctic Ocean. Gradually, the wind started to pick up. Light snow turned to flurries, turned to a howling wall of ice. My body quaked, my teeth chattered, everything hurt. All I wanted was to close my eyes and just sleep. I didn't even particularly care if I woke up. No, I had to get up. Get up. Fuck. It hurts. It took everything that I had to force myself to my knees, then finally to my paws. I swayed, trying to take stock. I couldn't hear anything except the wind, nor could I see any sign of the Sylvia, no glow of fire, no sound of the engines. Hello? Anyone? Nothing but silence, no cries for help, screams, shouts in return. The burst of panic in my chest dispelled the fatigue as I spun around, trying to get my bearings. Hello? Anyone there? I cupped my hands around my muzzle, screamed into the white. Panic jolted through me. If the Sylvia had exploded and no one else was alive. Hey! Is anyone there? I'm here! Oh fuck. Oh fuck. Please. I can't be stranded. I continued screaming, my voice becoming increasingly shrill and desperate. I scanned the dark just beyond the white flurries of something, anything that might be life. A light, a flare. Light, of course. I reached into my pocket, feeling a sense of relief when it closed around the sturdy torch June had given me back during the blackout. Thank Christ that I'd kept it. I flashed it around me, continuing to scream and shout for help. I had no idea how far the beam would travel in these conditions, but at least it wasn't in near total darkness. Then I heard it. It was subtle at first, almost inaudible against the buffeting wind, but then it sounded again. I could have sworn that it was a voice, distant, faint. With a final, despairing look around for any possible evidence of my former crewmates or the Sylvia, I turned, perking my eyes and pointing them this way and that to pinpoint the source of the sound. Trudging through the snow, I felt my body weaken. The snow and the wind seemed to suck the warmth from me. Every minute that had passed left me less able to move. My steps shortened and slowed. My eyes felt heavier. The voice or whatever it was faded. I continued on regardless in the direction that I was moving. Because really, what else could I do? Mom. Oh God. Now we're both going to be lost out here. Unmarked. Unburied. And when Mom passes, unloved. One step, another. My hips and legs hurt. My paws were numb. How long had I been walking now? How far was I from where I'd started? Stupid. I shouldn't have moved. Now even if there were any survivors, they'd have no chance of finding me. Just then, it felt like my knees were going to finally give, plunging me face first into the endless white. I heard another noise. Different from the first. It sounded big. I stopped in my tracks, straining my ears once more, trying to listen for it again. As I listened, the winds around me started to subside. The snow eased and my line of sight expanded, giving me a better view of my surroundings. This is impossible. As the blizzard eased, she came into view, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The groaning of metal sounded once more, like she was a wounded beast crying out in pain. I'd found her. I'd found the Arran. There were no signs of life, no lights, no movement that I could see. I noticed a snow mound piled up against her stern. There was nothing else that I could see along her hull that would allow me to get on board, so I began making my way there. The snow mound wasn't easy to climb, but it had clearly had time to settle into a natural ramp. I scrambled up on my hands and knees, my whole body shaking violently and my eyes heavy with fatigue. But finally, I reached the bulwark and dragged myself over it onto the deck. I wasn't entirely sure what I'd expected to see. Devastation, holes in the hull, maybe even bodies. But besides the layer of snow and ice, and the groaning of equipment under the weight of 2 years of neglect, it seemed almost normal. Only one broken window marred on an otherwise shockingly pristine scene. And part of me found that more concerning, if anything. But for now, I couldn't think on it. I needed shelter. Warmth. I spied an open door leading inside, creaking and swaying in the breeze, and with each passing moment, the hope of survivors faded. Once inside, I closed the door behind me, hoping to keep some of the frigid wind out. Hello? Is anyone here? Please, someone help me. Only the sound of the wind outside, the rattling of equipment, and the sounds of doors rhythmically slamming in the breeze answered me. I'd never felt so cold in my life. My nose felt like a lump of ice, my paws were numb, and my hands were tucked under my arms, hugging myself in the vain hope of warming myself. Okay, Garret. First things first. Find warmth. But on a ship this huge, where would I even start looking? No power meant no central heating. My clothing felt like a lead weight on me. Soaked through as I was, my clothing was far more of a hindrance to getting warm at this point. I started to strip, my hands barely able to unlace my boots, to unzip my jacket. They were shaking so violently. Once naked, I tried to shake off what I could. While the ice-cold water wasn't directly sucking warmth from me anymore, even the soft breeze inside the ship was enough to cause me to shiver. I needed alternative clothing, a blanket, something. A ship this size must have a huge kitchen and probably gas stoves. If the crew had survived for a while, they might have gathered supplies in a central place, like the mess hall or below decks. No, not now. My eye burned, forcing me to lean against the wall as I clamped a hand over it. The other fumbled in my sodden clothes for my pockets. Wait, where is it? I pulled out both bottles and squinted at them, tears welling up as the pain made me grit my teeth. Fuck, neither is proximedicane. They're both diclofenac. My heart dropped. I must have picked up 2 bottles of Diclo by accident. With an angry snarl, I shoved one back in my pocket, the other unscrewed the other, forced my eye open and squeezed. The cold of the liquid, no doubt even colder on account of being soaked in frigid seawater, soothed the pain on contact, but my eyes still burned. I'd have no choice but to wait for it to kick in. Squinting through the pain, I scanned for signs, maps or directions to somewhere that could hold something useful. The walls were a mess of warnings, notices, signage about hard hats or hazards, but I did find directions, mess hall and hospital. I continued a bit further and saw a set of icy-looking steps leading down into the pitch darkness. The stairs were barely wide enough for 2 people. At the bottom, the light caught a sign on the wall, engine room. Clothes. I needed clothes, and from those 3 possibilities, the hospital seemed like the best shot. Even if I could only find blankets, it was better than nothing. The hospital was fortunately signposted pretty heavily. I had to climb a set of icy steps to reach it, my paws nearly sliding out from under me. I clung to the handrails for dear life as I made my way up. On my way, I continued to call out, only the soft wail of the wind blowing through the interior answered me. When I arrived, the door was plain and unassuming, but it was marked with a green cross and hospital. Just before I gripped the handle, a thought struck me. Gail, Tabby, their mom was the ship's doctor. What if I found her? I hadn't found any other bodies so far, but that was no guarantee. Besides, I couldn't think of many places on board where I'd be more likely to find dead people. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let myself in. Is anyone there? Nothing, of course. Next to the door was a desk with old faded papers scattered on them. A PC, its screen covered with a layer of frost, stood silently. Beyond the desk was a set of disheveled beds. Fortunately, they were empty. I sat my soaked clothes onto a nearby table and started pulling blankets off the nearby beds. They were chilly but dry. I wrapped one tightly around my shoulders, another around my waist like an absurd skirt. Already, I felt a little better. With the intense chill softened by the blankets, I felt more able to look around. I stepped carefully around the desk, examining some of the papers strewn around, but most of them had deteriorated too much to be legible. In all honesty, I didn't really know what I'd expected. Bodies, maybe? The total lack of any signs of the crew were gnawing at me. There were a few shelves and some fridges full of drugs and medicines. I wondered if they'd had any proxy. It was a long shot, but my stinking eye decided for me that it was at least worth a look. I tried the fridges first, but I was quickly overwhelmed by an onslaught of unfamiliar drug names. When I examined the vials, a lot of them were misted with frost, the clear liquid within seemingly unchanged. With increasing frustration, I checked each vial, bringing it up to my torch before sliding it back. No proxy, just lots of drugs that I had no idea the purpose of. This was a waste of time. I cursed and staggered back, pressing my back against the wall to try and stay upright. How much time had I wasted? I needed a heat source. My eyes could wait. But I was still confused at the lack of any presence on board. Did they evacuate? If so, where? I glanced at the desk with the computer, stacks of papers strewn across the desk. Amongst the ruined paper and notes, one piece caught my eye. It was better preserved than the rest, although still mostly obscured by damp, and the ink had faded or smudged beyond legibility. I gently scooped it up, afraid that it would turn to mush in my hands. It was handwritten, faded, but parts were still legible. Staff are with increasing regularity. Shifts are often operating at reduced, much as half strength. I informed Dixon that my staff are overworked as it is, but she insisted that we continue with the agreed upon plan. Assuming the situation doesn't worsen, which we have enough chlorpromazine and to last another 6 weeks. Diazepam is nearly exhausted, and I would strongly object to widespread use of flunitrazepam, particularly due to its potential for abuse. Flunitrazepam. Require contact with mainland to discuss possible causes, but I am lodging a formal complaint about Captain McGregor's insistence on continuing despite. Morale is hard enough to maintain without stalking the corridors and shouting. Not much use. Apart from diazepam, I didn't recognize any of the drugs named, but it seemed clear a medical professional wrote this, maybe even Dr. Waters herself. In any case, there wasn't much that I could glean from it. I'd wasted enough time. I could barely stand anymore. I needed to find warmth before I lost consciousness. Forcing myself upright, I staggered to the door, my mind clearly searching for where to go next. Where do I go? I think it would be a good idea to go to the mess hall, because that's where you would think that if you got moored or whatever, that's where most people would be, and that's where most of the supplies would be. I don't really see why anything would be in an engine room. The doors leading to the mess hall were tightly closed. At first I thought that it was locked, but after pushing against it, I realized something on the other side was leaning against it. With a shove that would have probably been near effortless, had I been in a better state. The door creaked open on iced hinges. I slipped my body into the crack for once, thankful for my skinny frame. Hello? Nothing. Around me, my voice echoed amongst the empty tables, strewn with what looked like the remains of food tins, packets of snacks, water bottles, and drink cans. I paused, giving the air a sniff. As much as my nose hurt from the frost nip, I still had my senses of smell at least. Part of me braced for the scent of death, any of the Arran's crew remains. But the air only carried a faint, musty smell, the smell of clothes left in a humid closet for a long time, which was a relief. With another shove, I squeezed myself through the door. It was almost pitch black, only the tiniest amount of moonlight was making it through the thoroughly frosted over windows. As I surveyed the room, it quickly became clear that it had been a shelter of some kind. Makeshift beds were scattered on the floor, along with utensils, but where was everyone? This place had clearly been used by people waiting for rescue, but there was no sign of bodies. I couldn't help but feel like the state of this place suggested its occupants had left in a hurry. But if so, where? All the doors were closed, presumably to keep the heat in, and there were still boxes of cans, tins, and packets of food. No, I had to stop this. I had more pressing needs. I needed a working heater to warm up. I paced down the row of repurposed tables and benches, tipped over either to form blanket-covered or one-person shelters, or possibly in a fight. It was difficult to tell from the general disarray. My dread grew as I failed to spot anything like a heater, not even a barrel with wood. How the hell had they kept warm? That was when I noticed the shutter separating the dining area from the adjacent room. Of course, the kitchen. Maybe it had gas stoves? Surely a gas stove and some matches would warm me up, even if just for a little while, to stave off the frostbite, to keep me awake. I staggered to the door next to the shutter, my teeth clattering, and turned the handle. Bloody fucking hell! I turned and then pulled, and finally slammed my shoulder against it, but it didn't move. I doubted my skinny frame would have budged it, even if I wasn't near collapse. I leaned against the door, eyes closed and panting with exertion. What I wouldn't give to be able to just curl up and sleep right now. There were bedrolls all around me. The kitchen was out of the question, and the shutter looked, if anything, even more impregnable. How much time had I wasted? My eye no longer hurt, thankfully, but I couldn't tell if it was because the Diclo had kicked in or the general pain in my body had made it less noticeable. Pushing myself upright, I staggered back to the entrance. This place had been a waste of time, and now I didn't know if I had it in me to try somewhere else. Actually, let me check something real quick. I didn't have much confidence that I'd be able to restart the electricity, but the engine room must have had storerooms and machine shops nearby, and I couldn't think of anywhere more likely to have a heater and fuel right now. Descending deeper into the Arran's belly, the noise of the wind dulled and the biting cold subsided a little, but the darkness only closed in more. I clutched my torch for dear life and pulled the blankets around me even tighter. The winding corridors could have been impossible to navigate without it. The passages became slightly wider, the walls and ceiling more packed with pipes, cables, and machinery. And then suddenly it was before me, the doorway marked clearly, engine room. The moment that I stepped foot in the dark, pipe-filled engine room, I realized just how hopelessly out of my depth I was. The vast machinery surrounding me was an even bigger mystery to me than the Sylvia's breakers, and that, I was convinced, had been intentionally made incomprehensible. I didn't even know where to begin. I suddenly felt, for all my electrical knowledge, like a child who knew how to use building blocks suddenly expected to construct a skyscraper. I moved slowly between the rows of machinery, scanning with my torch beam for anything, really. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing around the banks of pipes and metal cabinets. But there was nothing. The darkness was thick, like an inky force that pressed into me, so thick it felt like it was choking me. In, count to 3. I was struck by the lack of signs of any of the crew, not even bodies or signs of violence or struggle. And I couldn't decide if that was reassuring or not. I noticed that there was a pile of tools around an opening in the central engine? Generator? I wasn't sure, but it looked like someone had been trying to maintain it at some point. Gingerly, shivering, I knelt and shone my beam into the opening. Parts of the machine had been removed and placed beside the opening, where a small tarpaulin had been laid down with tools placed in arm's reach. There was little doubt that someone had laid here, on their backs trying to do something to the machine. The components around the opening seemed to be in working order. But as I glanced deeper, I realized that this would need a mechanic, not a Sparky, to figure out. A complex array of shafts and pipes lay particularly disassembled. A wrench was still attached to a bolt, as though whoever had been here had been interrupted mid-repair. Whatever the case, this wasn't working again in its current state. For a moment, I just squatted there, staring into the machine in a cold-induced haze. I turned, sliding down the machine until I was sitting, hugging my knees. Never in my life had I felt so utterly, wretchedly alone and helpless. But my self-pity didn't last long. My eyes dropped, and I buried my numb muzzle between my legs and sighed. So utterly tired, I could sleep right here, on the cold metal floor. I sat there, trying to keep my eyes open, internally screaming at myself to stay awake before finally, with what little will I could muster, I slowly pushed myself to my paws. Warmth. I needed something to keep me warm. If anywhere on board had fuel, this would surely be the place, right? I wandered around, flashing my torch down narrow passages and across banks of pipes and cabling, looking for... I don't really know, to be honest. A door marked fuel? The deeper that I explored, the more lost I felt. I didn't know ships, but I was getting increasingly convinced that I wasn't going to find fuel cans here. I didn't know if I had the strength to search another place, but what choice did I have? Every step took effort. My teeth clattered, and I could barely keep my eyes open. In my daze, I could only think of one place left that I might find something to warm me up. Problem is, I had no idea where to go or where to look. As I slowly made my way down to the stairs, gripping the rail for dear life in case my trembling knees gave way, I could only guess. I shuffled, half awake, through the dark corridors, my torch beam vibrating violently as my hand shook. I don't know how long I wandered, spending every ounce of strength to stay upright, but when I briefly was pulled back into lucidity... What the fuck? It took a moment for my cold-addled brain to register what I was seeing. It seemed like a riot took place here. And the door... What language was that? There was nothing to indicate what was behind the door, no signs or labels besides the spray paint. And yet, I knew it had to be a warning. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry and my body was quaking violently. Who was that? On the edge of my hearing, a voice? Calling out? Connor? The voice seemed so distant, yet I could hear that it was almost next to me, muffled, and that's when I realized. Mom? I moved to the door, pressing my cheek to the cold metal and straining to hear. Mom? Are you there? It's me. I'm here. I'm alive. I pounded on the door. She was so close. I could hear her voice. I'm here. Just shout if you can hear. The muffled voice put my fur on end. But it had to be her. I hammered on the door. I didn't even notice the tears streaming down my cheeks. She needed to know. She couldn't be left wondering. My vision clouded. My knees folded and I slid down the door, the flashlight clattering away from me as I fell sideways, shivering. Someone, a woman, was calling me, but I no longer recognized the voice. She was gone. I was alone. I just wanted to sleep and never have to wake up. I'm here. Please. Take me home. Miracle. Can't believe. He be okay? No hypothermia. I heard voices. Raised, I think. Sometimes frantic. Sometimes angry. Fuck's sake, couldn't Connor and Clyde take this outside for once? The last thing either me or Mom needed was to listen to them screaming at each other. Do we do now? Should never have. This is all your fault. Stop this. This isn't helping. Then, as though my head broke the surface of a calm water, the sounds came through fully, as did the pain. My very bones ached. My skin felt like it was scalded, like a million needles were poking me. My nose felt like a burning lump of coal. My combined pain forced a soft groan from my chest, and the voices quickly stopped for a moment. Garret, you're awake. I forced open my bleary eyes. My one good eye took a moment to focus on the figure hovering over me. It was unusually dark with warm, flickering light. Garret, can you hear me? Can you talk? I tried to speak, but all I could manage was another soft moan. Finally, I could see the figure clearly. We were in the mess hall. It had been tidied up a little. The small candle heaters had been lit, and a gas lantern was hissing away, giving the room a dim but warm orange glow. Damn, kid, you're tougher than you look. I was shaken from my groggy stupor by a familiar booming voice. Dana moved into my field of vision beside Gale, giving me a surprisingly warm smile coming from her. Welcome back to the land of the living. Behind Gale was the rest of the group. Gale was beaming at me with relief, as was Stefan. Besides me, my clothes had been laid out over a table with a lantern nearby. We found your clothes in the hospital. It's what clued us in that you must have been somewhere on the ship. I remembered. I was still draped in the blankets from the hospital, but also I felt softness underneath, realizing that I'd been laid on a mattress on the floor between two overturned dining tables. Tabby looked sour, as did Arran, who were both standing off away from the main group. I recalled our argument on the Sylvia. Either they had held a grudge against me, or had missed yet another shitstorm. Sharif, June, Joseph, and Rufus were standing in pairs, June and Joseph on one side naturally, and even from here I could see Sharif and Joseph were fuming. Maybe I should just slip back into sweet unconsciousness and let whatever this was work itself out. It is good to see you survived as well, Garret. If I may ask. No, you may not. He needs rest. Give him a break, will you? He nearly died. I nearly died? It seemed whatever tension in the room was momentarily lifted as they crowded closer. Slowly, I forced myself to my paws, ignoring the protests of Gale. Dana offered me an arm and hauled me up. How did you find your way here? We thought that you'd been killed in the Sylvia's explosion. I don't know. I got lost in the blizzard, then it just cleared up. How did I get here? Now that I thought about it. I heard something? Had someone called out to me? But it was no use. The more that I tried to recall, the further away the memories drifted. like my fingers were brushing the edges of something floating on water. The more I reached for it, the more I pushed it away. As did we. It seemed that the blizzard dissipated, saving all of us. Look, as much as I'd like to go over what we've already been through. His tone was sharp, impatient. His eyes met mine, and I caught a brief glint of something unpleasant. But we still need to decide how to deal with the situation. The tension from before came back with a vengeance. Even Rufus and Donna, not normally ones to shy from confrontation, looked uncomfortable. And we need to figure out how we got into this mess. I cringed, expecting her to look at me, but her eyes were firmly on Joseph. Enough, Tabby. This is no time to start throwing around blame. It's the perfect fucking time. I told you all that fucking ship was a death trap, and now look where we are. Tabby, I'm just... Shut up. I don't want to hear any excuses from either of you. Did you even get the fucking radio working again before the ship went down? An awful silence settled. Even Joseph seemed taken aback. Well? I shuddered. I've heard that tone before, when he squared up to Sharif. The captain would have gotten a message off, I'm sure. You didn't answer her question. The others, Gale and Donna excluded, now pressed around them, cold, accusing glares forcing the pair to take a step back. It was my responsibility. I will take blame. No, it wasn't. You did. It was my responsibility. His tone turned sharp, shooting June a look. That's swell, but you didn't answer her goddamn fucking question. Did you get the radio fixed, yes or no? Guys. I croaked, struggling to stay on my feet, but they didn't budge. I made to move towards them, but Dana put an arm out, meeting my gaze. She gave me a firm shake of her head. Gail looked back and forth, frantic, but Dana gave her a hard stare. It seemed that she wanted an answer to the question, too. No. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. The mutinous glares sent a chill through me worse than any blizzard. So what you are saying? Sharif spoke slowly, carefully, but I've heard enough of his tone to know that he was seething. Is that not only have we not sent any distress message, but since GPS was down for hours before we sank, any rescue sent could be miles off the Sylvia's actual last position. Am I correct? Joseph met his stare evenly. Not for the first time did I envy his steel nerves. If he was afraid, he hid it well. Yes. Another terrible silence followed. So, now what? I'd blurted it out without really thinking, but it seemed to pop the bubble of tension that had been building. A little. Well, I would suggest we locate as many supplies as we can. Food, water, matches, fuel. Now, wait a second there. Who put you in charge? In case you have been paying attention, we're not on your goddamn expedition anymore. I did not put myself in charge. I merely... Oh yeah, another thing. Doesn't anyone find it convenient that we just happened to stumble on the Arran? I have no idea what you... His normally cool and controlled aura slipped off as he glanced around at the hostile gazes. I told you guys that he was up to something. I didn't believe that it was just an alternative route. Bullshit from the start. We set off on this new route of yours, and bam, we sailed right into the Arran. Coincidence? I told all of you that the route was the likely course. I explained all of this to you. Do you seriously believe it's extraordinary that... What is that weird noise? Everyone just calm down. This isn't helping. She's right. We need to work together. Oh, shut up, Gale. You're the only reason that I'm even here. Tabby, that is not fair. It was like a dentist drill in the back of my skull. Not even a noise, really, more like a vibration. Every time that I tried to pinpoint it with my ears, it seemed to move. Guys, throwing blame around is only... And where are we supposed to? Be methodical about this. Louder and louder, but also still not quite there. I covered my ears trying to block it out, but now it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. Where is that coming from? The others' voices faded into the background noise as I screwed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, like a giant mosquito had buried into my brain. Was I going to be trapped here? Die here? A miserable, slow, and lonely death with these people as my only company? Mom, she'd be completely alone. I just wanted someone to take me home. God, what is that fucking noise? Shit. I opened my eyes and looked at the others, who had stopped bickering to stare at me with a mixture of concerned and disturbed looks. Garret? She moved closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. I'm sorry. Can't anyone else hear? And then I realized that it was gone. Whatever noise had been there was only the sound of the wind outside, the dull creaking and groaning of the ship, and the awkward silence of our motley group. You should rest. You might still be suffering from hypothermia. To be honest, it sounded like a great idea. I felt like I could sleep standing up at this point. Look, Sharif is right. We should get ourselves set up to spend potentially several days here at least. A few unhappy murmurs, but no one objected. I'm going to look for Alex. Stefan, for Christ's sake. Fuck you. None of you thought that the Arran was still afloat. But here we are. I was right. You do what you want. I'm going to search this place until I find him. Before anyone could interject, he turned and stormed out of the room, his paw steps fading into the distance. Well, I mean, we're here, right? This is why we came out here. The rest of us exchanged uncomfortable looks, but I could see that everyone else was thinking the same thing. We all had someone on this hulk. Listen. If you guys want to search for your loved ones, why don't me and Joseph look for supplies and bring them here? A few guilty looks were exchanged as they recalled how they'd been at her and Joseph's throats just minutes earlier, but Sharif spoke for them all. That is a splendid idea. With everyone now left to their own devices, I was left to watch as people slowly trickled out until I was on my own. I moved gingerly over to my clothes and gripped the fabric. They've dried surprisingly well. I wasn't sure the inside of my boots would have had a chance to dry properly. But I'd still rather be in a mostly dry and warm clothing than these blankets. As I got dressed, I could hear Joseph and June talking from the far side of the mess hall, huddled together and talking in hushed tones. That was when I recalled the conversation between them on the Sylvia, where they'd seemed to be discussing blackmail and sabotage. On the one hand, this might be an opportunity to get their side of the story while no one else was around, but on the other, well, no one else was around, if I probed too deeply. Part of me thought that it was silly to be paranoid, but if what I'd heard was even slightly accurate, it was possible the pair were involved in something shady, maybe even criminal. Maybe I'd be better off waiting until they were separated. Talking to one of them might be more fruitful than trying to interrogate them both. Either of them might feel pressure to keep quiet in the presence of the other, or rather, June would. I couldn't imagine Joseph being pressured by anyone. That said, I seen him back on the Sylvia almost in tears. I'd imagine that's a sight few others could claim to have seen. Underneath the granite facade, he clearly had a heart. And that's where I'm going to leave it for today. So a lot of stuff is happening. The Sylvia exploded, and I actually did not expect that to happen. I knew that eventually they would have to find the other ship, the Arran, which they were looking for, and, you know, they would eventually have to go onto the ship, but I didn't expect them to blow up their current ship. But, and I won't say that, oh, well, it was to be expected because, you know, this ship is, the Sylvia was, like, falling apart and, you know, stuff like that. But, anyways, well, obviously the main cast survived because they're the main cast. But technically speaking, the image that you're seeing is more relevant to what is about to happen. So you have that to look forward to in the next video. Speaking of what would happen though towards the end of this one, the mysterious door with mysterious words. I wonder what those words are. Ooh. I obviously already know since I'm recording this bit after the fact. But yeah. I am pleasantly surprised that we're ranking up the spooks and the thrills, I guess you could call it, right now in the story. It's like it's going, even though it's been a while, it feels like it's like seriously ramping up all of a sudden, which, is good. I still get vibes of something maybe supernatural or maybe otherworldly happening, but we'll have to wait and see. Even though the shadow right there that you see is somebody holding an axe, it still feels like something else is going on, aside from mysterious missing people perhaps going crazy. But like, there has to be a reason why they're going crazy. Anyway, so write down in the comments what you think so far, and thank you all for watching / listening. If you would like to play Polar Night yourself, you can do so by going down into the link in the description, which should have a direct link for the itch.io page, where you can download the game and play it, or you can just go to itch.io.com and download it there. And they do have a form of support where you can get early access to builds of Polar Night, I think. Which should be linked down in the description along with other pertinent links. And if you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe it. It helps the channel and the videos. But yeah, anyway, so I guess that's it for now, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.